Hi. So this is a talk called Mindfulness and Emotional Intelligence, which is largely out of the Mindful Geek book. Okay, so we'll go into how mindfulness can help you cope with emotions in this talk. It's an iconic moment. The Rebel Alliance is making a desperate attack on the Death Star. As Luke Skywalker rolls his X-Wing fighter in towards the surface of the battle station, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi speaks into his head saying, "Luke, trust your feelings." At first, Luke is confused, thinking he must be hearing voices. But he sees the other pilots failing to hit the mark, and at the same time, Obi-Wan keeps whispering in his ear, saying, "Use the Force and trust your feelings." So finally, Luke folds away his targeting computer and, in fact, uses his feelings to make the shot. And as we all know, he scores a hole-in-one, destroying the Empire's shiny new weapon. Thus, the timeless wisdom of Star Wars teaches us that trusting our feelings is a good thing. But is that really true? And what does it even mean to trust your feelings? And how can you know what you're feeling and what those feelings signify? In this talk, we'll look at emotions, emotional intelligence, and how mindfulness meditation can help you cope much more effectively with your feelings in order to get more out of life. Along the way, you'll learn why meditation won't turn you into a Teletubby, how sitting alone in your room meditating can actually make you more adept in social situations, and how Botox injections can actually reduce your ability to connect with other people. And we'll do this from a perspective that is interested in and grounded by science, what I would call a geeky perspective. So as Van mentioned, my name is Michael Taft, and I got into meditation early in life. When I was a teenager, I was experiencing debilitating anxiety, super bad anxiety attacks, the kind where you sometimes can't even leave your room. And I didn't really know what to do about it. And there wasn't any help available that I could find. But I had read some books, and they said that there was this thing called meditation, and that it could help you to relax and calm down. And so even though I didn't have a teacher and they didn't really describe very much how to do it, I just gave it a try on my own. And voila, it helped me to feel better right away. So after that, I was hooked, and I've been meditating for more than 35 years since then. I've sat in both Buddhist and Hindu traditions all around Asia, in monasteries and temples and retreat centers, and learned from some of the greatest teachers there are. And although I have all this experience in religious traditions around meditation, I recently published a book entitled The Mindful Geek, which is all about learning mindfulness meditation in a completely secular, non-religious, and scientifically oriented way. So how did I get from A to B? From reciting mantras in Indian temple caves to penning a book that's loaded with like research and Star Wars references? It really began in the 2000s when I was working with the Bauman Foundation to write books and create the Being Human initiative. You may have seen the big conferences that we did in San Francisco, and to do other fun and fascinating projects. And a big part of that work was to go meet with neuroscientists and psychologists in their labs, and to talk with scientists and philosophers, and just looking into tons of research for many years. And the result, after decades of that, was that decades of doing meditation, the result was that I was compelled to reevaluate the entire field of meditation in the light of all this cutting-edge science. The good news is that the value of meditation held up quite well under this scrutiny. The better news is that the research contributed vastly to my understanding of how meditation actually functions and what types of meditation are most effective for what outcomes we're looking for, and how meditation can be taught in entirely new and innovative ways. So it really completely revolutionized my viewpoint of what's going on in meditation and how we approach the whole field. I realized that for many people, the spiritual context of meditation with beliefs and hierarchies and maybe claims was something that was getting in the way of them being interested in learning it. Lots of people who are, modern and secular and scientifically oriented just don't relate to that way of thinking at all. And it became stunningly clear to me that meditation, and especially mindfulness, is something that can be taught perfectly well outside of a spiritual context. For those interested in the spiritual context, that will always be there. That's available for anyone who wants it. But for those who are turned off by that sort of thing, there's a different way of learning that is not only possible, but which actually, in my opinion, offers a large number of advantages. So that's how I ended up writing a book called The Mindful Geek, and ended up here talking to you today at Google about mindfulness, meditation, and emotions. So just to bring everybody up to speed, let's define what we're actually talking about. What is mindfulness? Well, the classic, standard, card-carrying mindfulness teacher definition that we all have to know comes from a giant in the field named Jon Kabat-Zinn. He was the first guy that began to introduce mindfulness into the medical community. And to do this, he had to dress like the MIT-trained professor of medicine that he is. Up until that point in American history, and we're talking about essentially the mid-'80s, meditators were seen as hippies with long beards and long robes and long strings of beads, and people who are chanting with candles and incense. And I used to be one of those people. I like those people. And then along comes Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he's sitting there in a three-piece suit with a haircut and a necktie, and it just kind of blew everybody's mind because it was so different than what we had seen before, what anyone had done before. It was totally different than the cultural image of a meditator. And as part of his drive to bring this, mindfulness practice into hospitals, into the medical community, he had to come up with a really concise and precise definition. And it's pretty different than the way it had been talked about before. And his definition goes like this. Mindfulness is, quote, paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. So it's a pretty complicated definition, so I'll just say it one more time. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience moment to moment. So this has become the standard one-line definition that every mindfulness teacher is forced to memorize, or the mindfulness police come and take away your meditation cushion. You just have to be able to reel that off, from memory. And if you want to know the difference between mindfulness and meditation, the answer is simply that mindfulness is a kind of meditation. So it's a subset of the greater field of meditation practice, which includes a lot of other things. So what about all this emotional intelligence stuff that I was saying we'd talk about? Well, mindfulness meditation has been proven over and over to enhance your life in a whole bunch of different ways. This is all the research I keep talking about. It's been shown that if you practice regularly, you can expect improvement in areas such as concentration, creativity, memory retention, reduced stress, and a lot more than that. But for my money, probably the most powerful and interesting and useful and life-changing way that mindfulness can improve your well-being is in the realm of emotions. This is where it really, really starts to change your life. It's funny, but emotions, or feelings in the words of Obi-Wan, are maybe humanity's biggest problem. We're destroying the planet because we can't handle our feelings of greed. We cause havoc and murder and destruction with war because we can't handle our feelings of fear and hatred. But it's more personal than that, too. Virtually everything you do every day, you do in order to feel good emotionally. You're just trying to make your feelings feel good. You date your partner to be in a relationship that makes you feel good. You work out so you'll lose weight and not feel bad. You earn money in order to not feel afraid of starving, or to feel happy about the shiny products you line your nest with, and so on. So emotions rule your life. And based on that fact alone, understanding the background and function of emotions is clearly of supreme importance. The clearer picture you have of your emotions, the clearer picture you have of your entire life. And mindfulness meditation is a very effective method for gaining clarity and insight about your emotions and enhancing your emotional skills dramatically. Or to put it in the current jargon, mindfulness boosts your emotional intelligence. So I say that a lot to people. Mindfulness boosts your emotional intelligence. And what people hear me say is something like, mindfulness will make you happy all the time. But that's not what I'm saying. Rest assured, mindfulness will not make you happy all the time. The practice will greatly increase your well-being and enhance your life in many ways, but it won't make you happy every minute. It won't turn you into a Teletubby dancing without a care in the world or a thought in its head. No matter what's going on, everything's just great. Instead, mindfulness will allow you to feel your feelings with much greater sensitivity and also cope with those feelings much more effectively. It's not about so much changing them as changing your relationship to them. But let's get a little more fundamental here. Go back to first principles and ask the question, what are emotions in the first place? Where did we get them and what are they for? Well, evolution created emotions in animals as guidance systems. Emotions are mechanisms that tell you what to do in order to stay fed, safe, and to spread your genes into the next generations. So just for example, fear makes total sense in this context. It's like, hey, that one watering hole over there, over the next hill, always has a lot of predators lurking around it, so let's stay away from that, right? We're afraid of that watering hole because that's a bad place. Or anger turns on when you're cornered and you can't get away and you have to fight your way out. Anger's, evolved for situations like that. So, this is how emotions are guidance systems. They're there to motivate and direct your behavior, what to do next. So emotions in human beings evolved to do something very similar. They act as a behavioral guidance system for our lives. Or at least that's what they're ideally meant to do in an ancient ancestor of ours living in a small group on a savanna 1 million years ago. They're a little out of date now, and many of our reactions don't make perfect sense in a modern environment. One example is the fact that throughout almost all of human and pre-human history, a person lived in a tiny band of maybe 25 to 50 people. So you just saw the same 35 faces day in and day out for your entire life. Meeting new people, especially unexpectedly, was almost always a really bad thing. So we can tend to get triggered and anxious around strangers because our biology was, evolved to tell us that strangers are bad. And yet today, if you go for a little stroll down the street in New York City or sit in a baseball stadium anywhere, you can find yourself surrounded by thousands and thousands of faces you've never seen before instantly. So this produces anxiety because of the hardwiring of our brain, which tells us to get worried when strangers are present. So that's just one of the many ways that our emotional guidance system is a little out of date and needs some help, for example, with mindfulness meditation to cope with our current environment. So the thing about a guidance system is it works best if it has both negative and positive feedback. So you have to have both positive and negative. I mean, imagine a compass needle that's only stuck in one place, or a maps application on your phone that just told you to turn right at every intersection. It wouldn't work, obviously. You need both a north and a south, a right and a left for a guidance system to function optimally. And the same thing is true of your emotional guidance system. It won't work unless it has both a positive emotions and negative emotions with which to motivate and direct you. There's certain things that you shouldn't do or shouldn't be, do again. You should know that they're bad. So it's like, do this, don't do that, is what emotions are trying to tell you. And so you need both of them if the system is going to function properly. And so having a clear understanding that both positive and negative emotions are natural and adaptive and useful will go a long way towards both understanding why you're feeling something, but more importantly, to cope with what you're feeling and accept it, which is what mindfulness is going to help you to do. And, again, when I tell people this, there's this sense of like, that's fine, and that makes sense, and I understand the evolution of it, but really I just want to feel happy all the time. Can't we do that? But honestly, even if you could do that, even if you could feel happy every minute, you actually wouldn't like it. It would be a bad thing. And just for example, there are people born with a gene that makes it impossible to feel pain. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't you like that? You'd never feel pain. Sounds great. But these people who literally can't feel anything negative have very serious difficulties in life. They're constantly injuring themselves and breaking their limbs and burning their skin and other things, and they never know it. They only find out when they see it or someone else tells them it's going on. And so even the tiniest things are tremendously dangerous. And so most people who have this condition, which is known as congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, don't live long lives. It's just too dangerous to never feel any pain. And so with emotions, it's something similar. Just like pleasure and pain are a kind of guidance system, positive and negative emotions are a similar sort of guidance system. And in human beings, the activity of that guidance system, your emotions, is called decision making. And all of us have a lot of decisions to make each day. And it turns out that our ability to feel these emotions are central to that process of making decisions. That's right. We use our emotions to make decisions. We know this to be true because there are certain unfortunate individuals who, either through disease or injury, lose the parts of their brain that allows them to feel emotions. So we have examples of people who never feel any. And one of these people is referred to in the medical literature simply as Elliot, like it's a pseudonym. He had lost parts of his prefrontal cortex by having a brain tumor removed. And afterwards, he seemed completely normal. He was super intelligent, and he was charming, and he was well informed. But he had lost this connection to his emotional guidance system, and had lost, therefore, the ability to make good decisions. He'd agonize endlessly over what TV show to watch. He couldn't decide. And then sometimes rush headlong into and half-cocked into these big, important life decisions. And so he lost his job, and he lost all his money by making these crazy, financial speculations, and 86'd his marriage, and his children went away, and eventually, due to the loss of his emotional guidance system, his, life was ruined. And this is actually typical for people who have this kind of brain damage. They're completely brilliant. They have all the logical, rational ability that you'd think would allow them to make decisions, but because they can't contact their emotional guidance system, nothing works right. So the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that Elliot had removed, connects many different areas of the brain, including those that are concerned with reasoning to those that are concerned with sensing the feeling state of the body. So it's like a place where the reasoning and the feeling come together. And so when human beings go about making a decision, they do the reasoning part, collecting all the data about the subject, all this kind of external, concrete, cost-benefit analysis type stuff. But that's not the whole story. We also consult physical, somatic memories of our past emotional states, noticing how we felt as the result of making similar decisions in the past. How did I feel last time I did something like that? And most or all of this consideration goes on underneath conscious awareness. But eventually the process gives rise to the feeling that one of the choices is better than the rest. And noticing this requires the ability to sense the feelings in your body and to coordinate those sensations with the decision-making function of your prefrontal cortex. So you're doing this how did that feel last time sort of thing, and you have to be able to feel your feelings to do that. So for most of us, that goes on under the hood. But the gist of all this is that emotions are central to us making good decisions. And as such, we might like to imagine that we're completely calm and Spock-like in our choices, totally rational and analytical. But this is literally almost never the case. Although economic theory asserts that human beings are these sorts of rational actors, studies have shown repeatedly that we are anything but that. And somewhere under the hood, our emotions are playing a key role in every single decision that we make. So a writer and a neuroscientist that I really like, Antonio Damasio, calls his idea about how this works the somatic marker hypothesis, or SMH. To understand the SMH, you first have to understand that emotions are primarily somatic events. You know you're having an emotion because you're feeling it in your body. And this idea is usually a little weird for Westerners to accept because after 50 years of behavioral and cognitive psychology, we have this idea that emotions are mental events, like we think about emotions. And it's true that the brain is in charge of deciding, for example, that, we should be afraid if we see a train or whatever, but it's usually making that decision far below the level of conscious awareness. And more importantly, once it makes that decision like, hey, it's time to be afraid, then that triggers a whole series of changes in the body, like a faster heart rate and faster breathing and sweaty palms, and your muscles in your legs get all pumped up and energized and ready to run, and so on. And these characterize the feeling of being afraid. So even though emotions may be orchestrated in the deep unconscious, it's upon the soma, it's upon your physical body that their symphony is played out, right? So the brain decides it's time to be afraid, but then the body is the expression. And one of the ways that we can understand that is that our emotional responses evolved from similar emotional responses in animals, right? Who presumably aren't making a whole bunch of long, logical, rational, cognitive decisions about emotions. It's something you feel that motivates you to behave in a certain way. So try and experiment with me right now. It's going to make you a little uncomfortable. I want you to think about all the things that make you anxious. Whatever you're most worried about in the world right now, really bring your fears to mind. And, if you want me to just help you with this, you can think about global warming and rising income inequality and the fact that a reality TV star could soon be our president. And you can throw in the knowledge that you're going to die someday. Just actually get yourself worked up over your fears. Please do that for me right now. We won't do it for long. But to do this well, you actually have to try. And so do this for a moment till you notice you're feeling a little bit anxious. Okay? So raise your hand if you actually notice that thinking about that stuff is making you slightly revved up. A couple people? Okay. Good. Then ask yourself, how do you know you're anxious? What do you feel in your body? Is your stomach area tight? Or maybe you feel a little nausea? Or, your chest could feel tighter, or your breathing has sped up. What sensations, so just close your eyes and explore, what sensations in your body feel like the feelings of anxiety to you? It's okay if you're not sure, just notice whatever you notice, and remember that. And then the next time you get anxious at home or at work, out in the world or whatever, tune into your body again and see if the anxiety is expressing it with those same sensations that you noticed just now. Okay? It's a lot easier when you're not making it up. You're out there and you notice you're feeling real anxiety, check it out. But see if they're the same sensations. But of course, I'm not going to leave you all revved up and anxious, so let's go ahead and do the opposite. So again, think of the people and animals, people or animals that you love the most, somebody that you really care about. And see them in your mind's eye having the greatest day of their life, feeling super happy and doing things they really enjoy. And picture them laughing and joyous. So really do this right now, okay? Close your eyes and picture this. And just see them having a great time in your imagination and picture it as clearly as you can over and over. See them smiling and happy and just having a great time. And do this until you notice that you feel just a little bit of happiness somehow. And once you know, raise your hand if you feel, if that made you just a tiny bit happy. Okay. Now ask yourself, how do you know you're feeling happy? How do you know? Where are you sensing it in your body? Maybe you notice some activation in the muscles around your mouth and cheeks, kind of a ghost of a smile. You might not actually be smiling, but you start to feel that it might want to do that. Or you can feel the sensation of like upliftment or rising in your chest, or like your heart expanding if the happiness gets big, but you feel it in your actual chest. So these are some of the body sensations of happiness, and hopefully they replaced any sensations of anxiety we brought up. And the next time you get slammed with happiness out there in the world, remind yourself to contact these sensations of happiness in your body and notice the details of what it feels like physically to feel happy. And just take a moment when you do that to like enjoy and relish those sensations. Like allow yourself to really experience the pleasure of happiness in your body. So what we just did right there is a mindfulness of emotions exercise. It's a very typical exercise of beginning to notice, the sensations in your body of emotions. And there are a lot of other ones. The one thing to get out of it is that the experience of your emotions is largely in your body. You may have thoughts about an emotion, but the emotion itself is in the flesh. So then going back to the somatic marker hypothesis, remember it says somatic, which means embodied. Damasio says that the brain uses these emotional body sensations, like the ones you were just feeling, and it uses those to assist it in making decisions. Those are the somatic markers. When you're trying to make the decision, you unconsciously recall memories of previous similar situations and remember those feelings that you had in your body about the outcome. And as an example, imagine that you're trying to decide whether to buy a lottery ticket or not, which rationally is always a bad idea. You may feel very excited about the possibility of winning, like, wow, I could win, since the jackpot happens to be unusually huge this month. Yet, consciously or not, you also remember how you felt disappointed and downcast in your previous attempts at buying lottery tickets. You're remembering those feelings in your body. And those emotional tones serve as somatic markers that guide you away. Remember, it's a guidance system. Those remembered feelings of wow, last time I bought those tickets, that felt bad. That guides you away from buying a ticket this time. So that's how somatic markers work, and that's how emotions guide you. So researchers devised a fascinating experiment to test the somatic marker hypothesis. They created a game involving 4 decks of cards. And the participants in the game were given money by the researchers, so they all start out with a pile of money. And each of the decks are made of cards that either take money from your pile or give you more money into your pile. And so 2 of the decks were completely random. They had an equal number of cards that took away money and cards that gave you money. So they were fair. Those were fair decks. But secretly, the other 2 decks were rigged to have a lot more negative cards. They were cards that would steal your money. They were totally unfair. And this meant that those decks were bad, right? And so they have these participants play this game where they're, taking cards and giving cards back. And it turns out that healthy participants began noticing that those unfair decks were unfair after about 40 turns. It took them about 40 turns to figure out that those decks weren't random and they just would never choose from them again. But intriguingly, their bodies showed measurable stress after only 10 turns. So in body sensation terms, they already knew they were bad after only 10 turns, suggesting that their unconscious brain was already aware that the decks were no good. And in fact, if they were better at feeling their own feelings, like you get from mindfulness meditation, they would have stopped drawing the bad cards a lot earlier, because sensing the body sensations of emotions is how intuition works. But what's interesting is people with damage to the prefrontal cortex, these people who couldn't feel their emotions, just kept drawing from the bad decks for the whole game. They never stopped. They never caught on. So they went bankrupt and had to beg the researchers for additional funds to keep playing. And they never had a stress response. Hooked up to the same machinery, their bodies didn't know that the game was bad. So they couldn't feel their emotions, they couldn't make good decisions. So feeling our emotions is a big deal in having a good life. So this biological and evolutionary background of emotions leads us to one big conclusion. It's a good idea to feel your feelings and accept them just the way they are. Remember that official definition of mindfulness that I already said twice out loud? I'll say it one more time. Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, to the unfolding of experience moment to moment. So you might notice it includes that word non-judgmentally. And that means, in this case, accepting your emotions just the way they are. And it helps if you recognize that human emotions are responses that were programmed into our biology over millions and millions of years. We like to think that our emotions are personal and intimate and special things about us. And this is the Dr. McCoy theory of human existence. We're always hearing Bones passionately assert something about the value of squishy human feelings in the face of cold, rational logic. But seen from an evolutionary perspective, our emotions are a little bit mechanistic. And sure, the reasons you have for your emotions are very unique, and human beings are so complex that our emotional responses are very unpredictable and individual. But the emotional responses themselves are not necessarily yours, in quotes, as much as they are a reaction. And recognizing that is really helpful in coping with them. Admitting this means that you can stop taking so much personal responsibility for every little thing that you're feeling, which is usually a big relief. Not every emotion you're having is one that you consciously decided to have. Despite what all the New Age memes in your Facebook feed are telling you, you don't have total control over your feelings. Taking personal responsibility for each emotion makes about as much sense as taking personal responsibility for your liver function. Instead, accept that you're feeling however you're feeling. If you want to change that later, you can try to do that. And you don't have to express that feeling or do anything about it. And if you want to change the feeling later, you can try to do that too. But beating yourself up for how you're feeling emotionally at any moment is very counterproductive, and it just doesn't work. The system is doing what it's doing, and in mindfulness, we want to remember that. And particularly, feeling bad doesn't always mean that there's something wrong. You might have perfectly good reasons for feeling bad. As a society, we're really intolerant for the presence of unpleasant emotions, sorrow, or anything like that. We don't like having it. And we rush to fix it or change it immediately, even when the emotion makes perfect sense. So for example, some people take antidepressants after the death of a loved one because the grief can be so intense. And I'm not judging that one way or another. And during the recent updating of the DSM-4, which is the manual, the diagnostical and statistical manual that psychiatrists use to diagnose patients, the committee in charge of that wanted to categorize grief as a mental illness. So just feeling bad about somebody dying and feeling grief, they were saying, well, that's mental illness. Why? Because it feels bad. People don't like it. And so, this suggestion was vetoed, thankfully. They didn't end up putting that in there as a mental illness. It's true. Grief feels really unpleasant. But wouldn't it be strange to respond to, for example, the death of a loved one by feeling happy or nothing at all? It's a natural response. So when you see emotions in the light of acceptance, you can begin to have an entirely different relationship to them. You begin to understand that they're simply happening, like your heartbeat or your breathing. And a full range of emotions, including positive and negative, indicates that you're a healthy, functioning organism. Your emotions are there to guide your behavior, not to make you feel good. So now I just have to make a little public service announcement because people can take this too far. If you're experiencing something like clinical depression or a clinical anxiety disorder, taking a psychopharmacological medication could be an important step in your return to well-being, not just acceptance. Getting your emotional system in good working order is crucial, and sometimes the process requires things like medicine and psychotherapy and other interventions before you kind of get back on track. So in mindfulness meditation, you learn to accept your emotions. You don't have to like them and you don't have to want them, but you will have a much better experience each day by letting them just be the way they are and not fighting it. If you do this day in and day out, both in formal practice and in life, after a while you'll notice something really, really interesting happening. It's really worth it. So probably many of you have heard this quote, but Viktor Frankl, the neurologist and psychologist who was a survivor of Auschwitz, the most egregious concentration camp of them all, once wrote that, quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So this brilliant quote points to one of the deepest and most important benefits derived from mindfulness of emotions, and that is it increases your behavioral flexibility. It gives you more choices about your response. Human beings display a surprising amount of automaticity in our behavior. That is, under the same conditions, we tend to do the same things over and over again. Stimulus, response, same conditions, same response. And I know what you're thinking, which is that that's the definition of insanity. But really, it's just part of being human. Regardless of whether the behavior is effective or desirable or not, we automatically repeat it with a kind of mechanical predictability. To put it in Frankl's terms, there isn't any distance between the stimulus and the response. We just feel the feeling and then act. And if you do that, you just keep getting the same result every time under the same conditions. But meditating on emotional body sensations, so earlier we did a body sensation meditation, but you can go deeper and just meditate on emotional type body sensations like that feeling in your face of being happy or some of those feelings of anxiety. By meditating in that way with an emphasis on accepting the feelings, however they are, does something really cool, which is it builds a kind of gap or the space that Frankl's talking about between the stimulus, which is the emotion, and the response, which is what you do about the emotion. So there's a gap in there. And by cultivating this space, you gain something every human being ever born has wanted, which is the ability to choose whether to respond to this emotional urge or not. And if you do decide to respond, you can choose how you want to respond. It's not just a reaction anymore. The emotions themselves haven't changed. You're accepting however you feel. You're not like submerging yourself in a sea of bliss. It's not all happy, happy, joy, joy. Instead, you're going to feel your emotions very keenly, but you develop the ability to not act on them if you don't want to, because you cultivate this kind of acceptance. And this can save you and those around you a lot of trouble and pain. Think of all the times you've done something rash and regretted it afterwards, like you've said something out of rage or spite that should never have been spoken. Think of all the urges or compulsions or even addictions that you automatically respond to, even when you don't want to. You know they're bad, but the feeling comes up and you just do it. Mindfulness of emotion allows you to gain some measure of control over that, and maybe even a kind of wisdom with respect to the expression of these emotions. You're able to respond intelligently rather than simply react. So it's interesting because like ancient philosophers and theologians from every culture were almost uniformly negative about emotions, which they called something like the passions. And it's because of this feature that human beings can do something terrible and irreversible in a moment of emotional intensity and then regret it for the rest of their lives and cause a lot of damage. But meditation on emotion, mindfulness of emotion, can help you to make sure that you think before you act and do the intelligent thing. And you should check out the groundbreaking addiction research and treatments done by my friend Judson Brewer. He's a PhD MD from Yale. If you want to learn more about the power of this way of working, because the the kind of results you can get from meditating on, say, urges of addiction or emotional urges is amazing. It's getting amazing results in double-blind studies. Okay. So once you're accepting the emotions that you're feeling, but not necessarily acting upon them, what next? How can you use that time between the stimulus and the response, between the time you start feeling the emotion in your body and the time you do something about it? The answer is you can meditate upon the body sensation of the emotion with as much clarity as possible. You want to have clarity. And what do I mean by clarity? Well, you can think of meditation as a kind of awareness extending technology, like a telescope or a microscope. When you begin the practice of mindfulness, you're training your awareness on present moment sensory experiences. And at first that'll feel pretty normal. But after a while, you notice an increase in your ability to detect finer and finer qualities of sensation at smaller and smaller scales. Your brain just gets better at detecting the different sensations in nearby areas of the body. This aspect of meditation is called sensory clarity, where you use your awareness like a telescope or a microscope to see smaller and subtler sensory experiences. Sensory clarity takes a while to develop, and it requires that you attempt to make these really fine distinctions in your meditation practice. So it's not just about feeling your body, it's about getting good at feeling the details of your body. For example, if I asked you to concentrate on the bodily sensations currently present in your right foot, which we did earlier, so do that now, feel your right foot, what do you feel? Most people with no mindfulness training report basically feeling their entire foot. It's as if the sensations can only be experienced as a few big pixels of information. It's just a foot, because we're not used to zeroing in. Or maybe, you have a little efficacy or a little clarity, and you might call it sensory resolution. Maybe you have a little resolution on your body sensation, and you can feel 4 or 9 big pixels of feeling there, feeling data in your foot. But with mindfulness practice, the resolution of the sensory data in your foot can get a lot bigger, like 128 pixels of feeling in your foot. And eventually, and it won't take that long, like 6 months, you'll be able to effortlessly feel pixels as small as a grain of sand everywhere in your foot, the surface, inside, all through it. You can just pick out each little spot individually. And one study, you can just take my word for it, but there's science about this. One study found that meditators were not only able to focus much better than controls, this is after only 4 days of practice, but that they increased the depth of information processing on their body sensation as well. And that's what I'm talking about, the depth of information processing. So there's more pixels of data there. Another study focusing on tactile sensations looked at a number of objective and subjective measures of sensitivity in experienced meditators. And they found that the measured area of the cortex of their brain dedicated to tactile sensation was bigger. The researchers found that meditation enhances introspective accuracy for bodily sensations, meaning that the practitioners don't just think they have greater sensation, or greater sensory clarity than non-meditators. They actually have a much more resources, much more neurons, dedicated to the task of body sensations than people who don't meditate. So you grow this really high quality sensory resolution. And it doesn't have to be just your body, it can be on all your other senses also. So in the case of emotions, you learn to be very precise and detailed and specific with regards to emotional body sensations. Meditating on emotions in the body will develop the part of your brain called the insula, which is the part of the brain associated with the feeling of internal sensations. And doing this will help you get better at noticing these fine degrees of sensation, which my teacher, Shinzen Young, calls skill at feeling. Skill at feeling has a number of important benefits. One is that it will allow you to know more about how you're feeling. Many people have a difficult time describing or even knowing what emotions they're actually having right now. It's not so much a lack of vocabulary, but a lack of the ability to contact emotional sensations with clarity. They just know they're feeling something. But by developing the skill at feeling through mindfulness, you'll have a much better idea of what you're experiencing emotionally moment by moment. And given that these little feelings are so important in decision making, like remember that game where people could have chosen the cards instead of after 40 turns, after only 10 turns, presumably, if they had been able to feel their emotions better, it's a really important thing to be able to do. So it's clearly very helpful, and it's almost like growing better and better at having intuition. But there's even more to it than that. There are even bigger and better benefits to practicing mindfulness of emotions. You know, it's funny when you tell your friends that you're going to spend the next 10 minutes or 30 minutes off in your room meditating, they, you know, if they're cool, they'll be supportive. But I've often heard people say that it's a selfish thing to do, or that it's, you know, meditation like that is self-indulgent. And, you know, I can see why they would think that. You know, you're sitting alone in your room, paying close attention to your body sensations, for example, and that can sound like a really sort of precious and self-absorbed activity. But the really fascinating thing is this. Sitting alone in your room, meditating on your feelings of emotions in your body can actually make you better at knowing what other people are feeling. And that, of course, is the opposite of being self-absorbed. It can actually make you much more empathic. It turns out that human beings tune into other people's feelings by subtly mimicking the other person's expressions in their own faces. And these are known as micro-expressions. These are just very tiny, almost unconscious versions of normal expressions. So if, you know, the person across from you has a big smile, you have this micro-expression smile that can't be seen with a camera but can be detected with, you know, electrodes. And that's just part of our built-in evolutionary mechanism that helps us, you know, cooperate with a group of other people, which is what we evolved to do. Meditating on emotional sensations begins to slowly make these feelings of these micro-expressions a lot more noticeable. So most of the time they're going on, you know, unconsciously. You're making these micro-expressions to understand other people's feelings, but you don't really know you're doing it. But meditating on them makes it so you can feel those micro-expressions. And that's a crucial skill for deepening connection with other people. And that builds better relationships. You just get better at people. Again, there's some really compelling evidence to show that this is the case. So how can we actually prove that people really do get this empathic information from mimicking others' expressions? Most of us aren't even aware that we're doing it, so self-reports wouldn't help. What if we could somehow freeze people's facial muscles so that they were actually physically prevented from mimicking others? Is there a population of people readily available who have frozen facial muscles? Yes, and they're called people who get Botox injections. So researchers Neil and Chartrand gave a standard empathy test to a group of women who had received Botox injections. The test involves looking at pictures of people's eyes and then determining what emotion they're feeling. So you look at all these different pictures of eyes and you're like, this person's scared, this person's happy, whatever. And then they compared these results to another group of women who had gotten injections of a dermal filler, which is another kind of cosmetic thing, but it doesn't impair your muscles, your facial muscles. And it's clever because that group of women were very similar in terms of age and income and all these other demographic features. So the groups were really similar, except one group's facial muscles were frozen and the others weren't. The result was that the Botox women were greatly reduced in their ability to empathize with others. They couldn't guess properly what other people were feeling. And it's because they couldn't move their own facial muscles and couldn't tune into their own micro-expressions. So they lost this ability to connect. And so just to prove the point, to make sure this wasn't some statistical anomaly or something, the researchers did something that I thought was really cool, which is they did the entire experiment again, but this time, instead of the Botox group, they gave a group of women a kind of stiffening gel on their face. It made their skin really stiff. And all that did was make their muscles work a lot harder to move. They didn't freeze the muscles or stop them, but they made it harder to move. And because the muscles had to work harder, it made those micro expressions easier to feel. That's the important part. They could feel the micro expressions. And as expected, those women got much higher scores on the empathy test than the people with the dermal filler. So mindfulness does something very similar to this stiffening gel. Over time, your insula, which is the thing that allows you to feel your body, gets bigger. And so your ability to feel these micro expressions gets heightened. And because you can feel it more clearly, you can tune into other people much more effectively. And that's how sitting alone in your room can make you more empathic and even do better in your relationships and social situations. So these are the basics behind using mindfulness to increase your emotional intelligence. You accept the emotions you're feeling, you notice that those emotions are embodied experiences, and you zero in on the physical details of each emotional body sensation with as much clarity as possible. Trust your feelings, Luke. With daily practice over time, you'll notice a positive revolution in your experience of your own inner life, your interactions and relationships with other people, and even your satisfaction with existence. Thanks.
So mostly what we covered right now was how the science works.
Yes.
In terms of implementation, do you suggest something done differently? So mindfulness meditation mostly today focuses on the breath or something that you can just pay attention to. Given that there is an emotional context to it now, is there something else you suggest or propose?
Yes. So honestly, the only different thing is that instead of the emotional body sensations associated with breathing or the emotional body sensations of a body scan, you're picking out the emotions, the sensations of emotion. And that's why I had you do the thing of bringing up the anxiety or bringing up the happiness, so that you could learn to feel what an emotional sensation feels like. And then I was saying out in the world, when you have those emotions, let's say you get really happy one day. You're super happy. Just spend 5 minutes or 1 minute or even 30 seconds and tune into the feelings of the happiness in your body so you begin to learn what an emotion feels like. But then after that, you're doing the same things that you would do in any other mindfulness, which is you accept those feelings just the way they are. You don't try to change them. And as I mentioned, you zero in really specifically on the details of the feeling. So you would do that in a breath meditation or a body sensation meditation anyway, right? You're going to accept the feelings and you're going to get into the subtleties. You want to notice the fine details. And in this case, the fine details of emotions in your body. That's all it takes. Because after a while, you'll start feeling your feelings like a week before you would have felt them before, or 10 minutes before you would have noticed them before. And that makes all the difference. That's building that gap between stimulus and response. Suddenly, it's like how those people could have potentially noticed the bad decks earlier. Their body was noticing it. They're having a stress response. If you know how to feel a stress response, then you could presumably notice that the decks were bad earlier. So just getting really good at feeling the feelings and not trying to change them, getting into the details, getting all sensitive, changes your life.
I have a question. Are you familiar with trapped emotions? And you can give me an insight in how mindful can help release a trapped emotion?
So what do you mean by the term trapped emotion?
Trapped emotion is emotion that is physically trapped in the human flesh by not dealing with it in time, and over time you just get trapped. I know for a fact that that's a condition that we all are affected by. If you are familiar with that or not, what you can tell.
Yeah, what I would say is that the main thing to do there is the acceptance piece. Because for an emotion to stay suppressed like that or stay trapped, it has to have a force keeping it in there. It's being suppressed in some way psychologically. But if you, over time, through meditation, through mindfulness, are reversing that psychological stance and accepting over and over what you're feeling, it might be that you don't even feel that trapped emotion for a long time. But then one day, because your insulin's growing and you're getting much more sensitive, much more detailed, you notice, hey, I'm feeling something in there. I'm feeling something in there. And it might not feel very good, right? There's a reason you're suppressing it. It might feel really awful. But you just keep accepting it, and eventually it will start to express. It's why you have to have this stance of acceptance, because you want those kind of suppressed emotions to express and then be done with them. Awesome.
So I do a lot of training on my team around feedback. And when I say that word, everyone's like morale just drops considerably. It has a very visceral, emotional response. And I train them using almost the exact same technique that you did around like almost like immunizing yourself. So like I'm going to purposely apply pressure so that you can feel what this feels like to get like the worst possible news. So if you see it again, you won't feel as bad.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have any other suggestions I can give my teammates when I train them on this kind of behavioral response?
Suggestions for making it,
I guess, bearable, tolerable. It's a painful process, especially here. Feedback can be really intense. So.
Right. So I'm sure, as you already know, starting out with small emotions is better than starting out with big ones, right? Little tiny discomforts emotionally are much easier to work with. The other one is, and I mean, this is not necessarily making it easier, but it's different in your lab or your office than it is out in the world. And so it's something you can give them on the first day is just to say, hey, we're not going to trigger you emotionally here, but you're between the time you see me now and the time you see me next, when something triggers you and you feel bad emotionally, here's what you do. So that it's allowing the world to kind of give them, the difficult experience, but now you've given them the way to work with it, to begin working with it. And then when they come back the next time to the office, they have material that you've already given them a tool to help, cope with that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thank you all very much, and hope to speak to you again.